Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 6th of December. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by giving us a call on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. That'll start you off with the entire statewide view. And once you click on the map, you'll be able to get to your local information from the weather office in Fairbanks, the folks in Anchorage, and of course the folks in Juneau, where it is snowing Alaska style, an awful lot right now. We'll talk about those warnings here in just a minute. You can always email us as well at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov if you've got a question about the websites, if you've got a question about the weather, if you'd like to find some resources for your school and you need some help finding some of that science information that will work really well for your kids and your students, we can help you with that, and we'd certainly like to help you with any other weather questions you have around Alaska, and certainly send us your weather photos as well. We'd love to see those no matter what part of Alaska you're riding from. Now, as we look at southeastern Alaska, all the red shaded areas are winter storm warnings, and that is where it is going to snow tonight and probably well into tomorrow. In some cases around Juneau, we're talking about snow as much as 10 to 15 inches. Possible by early tomorrow morning and into the afternoon. So a winter storm warning is in effect through tonight from about 9 o'clock all the way through 9 o'clock tomorrow. That's going to include places like Elfin Cove and Pelican and Juneau. And as you work northward, you get into more yellow shaded areas. Of course, not a significantly lesser amount of snow, but Haines is used to a little bit more. So this is only a winter weather advisory. However, it is going to snow in that area, and looking for about 6 to 9 inches around the Haines region, as well as areas across the central and outer coast, including Sitka and southward. This also includes Hoonah. And then as you get up north around Yakutat, Cape Fairweather, and Icy Cape, expecting areas there to pick up a good 3 to 6 inches of snow. So it looks like probably, I'm sorry, a little bit more than that, probably about 10 inches or so around the northern areas around Yakutat. And that's going to be mixed in with rain and snow. So anywhere from about 6 to 10 inches across the northern Gulf. That'll continue through 9 o'clock tonight. So some of these areas are going to see the snow wind down a little bit tonight. But if you're around the Juneau region all the way up toward Hoonah, you're probably talking about snow possibilities that'll take you well into tomorrow. So southeast, especially northern southeast, enjoying a little bit of winter. So hopefully it is enjoyable for you wherever you are in southeast. Here's the weather setup, and you can see north low pressure across the northern Gulf, really just east of Kodiak today. Some of the wraparound precipitation was reaching well into Kodiak throughout the afternoon, but the focus on cold and precipitation has really been across the northern and eastern sections of the Gulf today. You can see considerably different weather just south of Sitka toward Ketchikan and Annette today. The clouds were certainly there, but the precipitation and all the ingredients to make all that happen just wasn't quite over southern southeast. As you look up north, a lot of what you see across the interior, southwest, and the west coast is that milky color that we would normally call clouds. However, this is more of an infrared satellite picture, so we're using that thermometer to sense the air temperature, as we've talked about many times before. And of course, this is just cold, cold air, which the computer doesn't really know the difference between cold and cloud. So in this case, it looks like clouds. Not much going on here, but out west, all of this, of course, is cloud cover. It moves. That also helps to tell the story. And you can see that next wave working across the western Bering and into the central and western chain. Really, the bulk of the weather and the stronger southerly flow is still out here around Shemya. Gales out there today. That'll probably come up a little bit more tonight and into tomorrow, as you'll see on the marine charts. But it has to take over this huge amount of very dense, rough, tough, hard to bluff, cold, cold Arctic air. And that's not going to happen. This is really just going to hold this back. So we'll be stuck in this kind of pattern for at least a little while, with low pressure just kind of lurking and spinning and sending out little lows here and there across the Gulf and eventually falling apart. and we'll have to wait for the high pressure and the cold to kind of drain out of Alaska before the pattern really starts to shift. So here we go. Low pressure sitting just east of Kodiak at 1,011 millibars. Another wave of low pressure across the eastern Gulf. And here's that big cold. If you're in aviation and you're watching the altimeter, you know 1050 and higher is big bad. 1053 here out across the central parts of Canada and up across the Northwestern Territories, 1,055 millibars there. So we got those painted in red just so they stick out a little bit more to you. If you're looking out west, 1,042 millibar high is sitting out across the Bering Strait region, and then across southwestern Alaska, here's the cold meeting up with a little bit of the moisture in the west, a little bit of light snow there passing through Bethel and southwest and Bristol Bay today, as well as areas along the Alaska Peninsula. A lot of the cloud cover we saw there blowing off the mountaintops. A little bit of snow on the other side. And then for southeast, warmer air is marching northward with wet air as well. That's meeting up with that deep cold, and all the surface dynamics all just kind of coming together and making a pretty good weather maker there across northern southeast today. So as the snow started coming down, our friends in Juneau said, that looks like a winter storm warning. And thank you for all of your snow reports. And in fact, if you're in southeast and you get snow, you can give the folks in Juneau and the weather forecasters there a snow report. Very easy to do, actually. If you go to the website, weather.gov/Juneau, on their page should be a little icon at the bottom that says submit a storm report or a local storm report. Just fill out the form. Tell them where you are, what time you made your report, measure carefully, of course, measure a couple more times just to make sure that it's really what you got. Give it to us in tenths, any like 1.1, 1.3, 1.5, anything like that. You don't have to give us sixteenths, but if that's where you are, that's fine. And then let us know what you get. You can tweet it to Juneau, NWS Juneau on Twitter. Just post it on Facebook, make a comment that way. Or if you use that official form, it actually dings the computers at work. That's pretty cool too. We know we just got a new storm report from you, and that really helps. Out across southwestern Alaska, again, a little spotty snowfall there. High pressure out to the west. You can see the effects of that just chewing away the clouds across the eastern chain, Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, and of course, all the very cold and stable air across the interior. So when we look at the forecast panels here, don't have a whole lot of clouds to show you there. And where the pressure gradient starts to relax just a little bit, we're still getting some winds across the Yukon Valley, so potential for some blowing snows will go through tonight there and across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. The focus down south, of course, will be snow across central and northern parts of southeast. Across the northern Gulf, probably looking at some snowfall over the Chugach and parts of Prince William Sound. Wind chill advisories, in fact, for Thompson Pass will continue through noon tomorrow. We could see wind chill values as cold as 40 to 50 below, and that's with a wind around 25 to 35 miles per hour. So if you're planning travel through the Thompson Pass area, make sure you take some extra supplies. The worst thing that would happen is you break down at the top or something happens along the way and you have to pull off and it's cold and you have to get out of the car. Make sure you're protected there if you're traveling at all anywhere in Alaska right now on the road system. Just always a good safe bet to pack some extra supplies just in case. Out across the west, not a whole lot of cloud cover to report across the western coast and into the chain, but you can see the beginnings of that next weather system across the western Bering, and by Wednesday we should start to see a cold front trying to push its way into the region. Now it's funny that that's a cold front, because what is all this? This is some big time cold air. However, the difference between the cold we have here and what we'll get into more of a southerly flow here, well, then that returns to colder air once again on the western side of that front. So yes, it's a cold front, but it's probably not as cold as what's up here. Out across the northern and eastern Gulf, the frontal boundary across the central parts of southeast and the northern Gulf really isn't going to move very much, so we're going to change this into a stationary boundary. Out across the west, still looking at some snow showers into Kodiak Island. Some of that was probably going to float back and forth between rain and snow showers across the eastern chain into parts of Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. And there's still an opportunity for some blowing snow around southwest and the central interior, with high pressure still anchored across the Northwest Territories at 1,054 millibars. By Thursday, it's creeping eastward. If you have travel plans into, let's say the Midwest or even the West Coast, there's going to be some cold air on the move into the lower 48 states. So if you're driving through Canada, if you're going into the 48, you might take that Alaska coat with you, because all that cold air wants to go wherever it wants to go. and it's going to go there. And once it drains out, the folks down south are going to know it. As we look at southeast, things start to break up there. You'll probably see a partly to mostly cloudy day on Thursday, but certainly improving weather as far as precipitation goes anyway. With the pressure gradient here, I'd count on a little bit of wind. And look at that. You can see that tight packing of those black lines. Those are isobars, or lines of constant pressure. The difference in that pressure between the high pressure centers out west and what you see up across the Northwest Territories and the low in the Gulf, well, that has to equalize in some way, and that's really all wind is that air moving from high pressure to low pressure. And as we get into the nooks and crannies of Alaska, places like Thompson Pass and places like the Gap in the mountains behind your house, that's where the wind likes to go through and speed up. And because it's cold, it certainly kicks in the wind chill just a little bit too, doesn't it? As you look at across the Yukon Valley, things are fairly clear there. Probably a little bit of a breeze across the North Slope, but high pressure still in command there. Out across the west, the next disturbance working into the central and western Bering is creeping eastward just a little bit more. But that frontal boundary is kind of falling apart there. So we might see some clouds, maybe some light rainfall or rain mixed with snow across Adak and Atka. But beyond that, the focus is still in the Gulf with showery rain and snow as we get into Thursday. Here's a look at temperatures now. We know it was cold enough for snow in southeast, 20s for just about every location today. 34 around Sitka, a little bit milder around Ketchikan and Annette. 25 for Hyder, and 19 up around Skagway earlier this afternoon. Prince William Sound, Valdez was 14, Cordova was 36. Huge difference there. 20 around Seward, 17 for Kenai, 14 in Anchorage, 13 for Talkeetna. Fairbanks checked in at 3 o'clock at 23 below zero. 16 below around Eagle, and it was 44 below in Fort Yukon. One of the coldest spots not only this morning but through the day. Temperatures just didn't budge all day long, it looked like. -8 around Kaktovik. It was 10 below for Point Barrow, and down the road toward Atkasuk, 19 below. Wainwright saw temps also close to 20 below. Kotzebue Sound temps anywhere from about 5 below to 17 below as you got a little bit further back into the Sound. 10 below for Nome. 23 below, and Galena McGrath was 22 below. Southwest temperatures in the single digits, a few places going to about zero like Bethel. Teens for King Salmon and Dillingham. 35 in Kodiak, a nice balmy day there. 20s and 30s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint 30 degrees, St. Paul 34, lower 40s for Adak and Atka, and Shemya was 42 and breezy. Now, as we get into tonight, look for temps to stay well below zero for the interior and Fort Yukon, anywhere from 20 to probably 45 below for many across the eastern interior. The North Slope, 10 to 20 below. South and western communities looking at temps around 3 to 5, even 10 below. Bethel, looks like you're going to catch some of the cold draining out to sea there. 24 below is possible for you. 32 above in Kodiak. Teens and 20s for southeast, and for Prince William Sound, and many in the Cook Inlet region will be in the single digits again tonight. Mid-30s for most of the Alaska Range and the Aleutians. Now, as we get into high temps tomorrow, 20s and 30s for many across southwest. The Aleutians likely in the lower 40s. Out across the interior, expect high temperatures again, maxing out at the balmy range of 20 to 30 below. Fort Yukon again probably winning that race. 6 below in Barrow, 7 above. For Nome, southeast, looking at temps in the 20s and 30s tomorrow. Sitka around 37, and Anchorage in the lower 20s if you're flying in. Flying weather, well, not too bad for visibility across the interior or southwest. You might have some MVFR in the morning there. IFR conditions across some of the eastern Alaska Range and the Talkeetnas and into the northern sections of southeast. Once you get into the southern southeast regions, you're probably going to be fairly clear. That should stay that way through most of the day. IFR conditions around Portage Pass in the northern Prince William Sound area, as well as the northeastern corner of Kodiak Island, and you can see the approaching system out across the west, moving through the Aleutians there with IFR developing in the afternoon. Anaktuvik and Anigan Pass, we're going to say VFR. It's going to be cold. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass looking for improving conditions throughout the day. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass expecting VFR all the way through Isabel Pass as well. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions throughout the day. Tanita Pass, we expect MVFR through most of your day. Portage Pass is going to lean over toward IFR conditions as we get into the afternoon, as you saw on the charts there. Chilkoot and White Pass should see some improvements there. Again, some of the heaviest snow coming through tonight and into early tomorrow before it starts to diminish in the afternoon. Freezing levels, no doubt about it. With the temperatures we just saw, the surface freezing line has taken over really all of the mainland there and hovering close to Kodiak Island. It's even offshore of southeast. And warmer air does lurk out across the western Bering there with freezing levels aloft as high as 6,000 feet. There is some icing potential out west, some of that above 6,000 to 8,000 feet. What we'll be watching a little bit more carefully for more people is the sections around northern southeast above 5,000 feet, where we get into some light to isolated moderate, as well as some areas around the Chugach Range and into the Kenai Mountains, generally above 3,000 feet. Again, so far that is listed as light to isolated moderate. Most of the mainland is okay. The jet stream, no question about it, with the cold air in place, you probably could have drawn this yourself, that big bubble of cold and unstable air across the Gulf representing our big weather pattern right here. Low pressure's in charge of the Gulf. Out west, though, that upside down horseshoe shape there, that omega shape, that tells us this weather pattern is probably not moving very quickly. It gets into somewhat of a blocking pattern, and no side wants to move. We're at a stalemate, and until something changes just a little bit, like a whole lot of cold air flopping over and draining into the lower 48, we're probably stuck in this pattern for at least a little while. So high pressure right now is anchored in eastern Siberia. Down below at 9,000 feet, low pressure is in charge of the Gulf, as we've seen. High pressure still sitting across British Columbia there, with southerlies working up the eastern Gulf at 20 knots. North and easterly winds are draining along the north and western side of low pressure in the Gulf. Those winds here across the interior, anywhere from 25 to as high as 50 knots there across the west coast. On the reverse side of this high pressure ridge, south and westerlies coming up the western Gulf, anywhere from 40 to about 60 knots. That's at 9,000 feet. Below that, at 3,000 feet, southerlies at 50 to 60 knots from the south. Here's our high pressure ridge, and on the east side of that, wrapping into low pressure, you see wind speeds picking up across the Yukon Valley, anywhere from 30 to 45 knots. Across the eastern Gulf, 15 to 20. Easterlies moving across south central, 25 to 35, and then northerlies across the eastern chain and the Alaska Peninsula, 25 to 40. Turbulence, I'd watch for some chop across the Yukon Valley, and it looks like that expands a little bit more as you get out towards southwest, below 4,000 feet. Across the northern Gulf, below 4,000 feet, watch for occasional moderate across parts of southeast, especially in the morning through Shelikof Strait and the Barren Islands, and out across the western chain. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Sky conditions refer to sky cover from clouds like these or from other layers aloft. Now, what's the format that the sky conditions take? Well, it starts off with the amount of the sky cover, then the height of that sky cover, and sometimes with clouds the type, or if it's an indefinite ceiling, it'll come with vertical visibility. Now, the sky cover is reported in eighths of sky cover. Maybe that's an effort to conform to the New York Stock Exchange reporting, which is also done in eighths. The height of the various layers of sky cover is given in a 3-digit format in hundreds of feet. They add leading zeros when they need to in order to fill in all the spaces. So if you see 009, that is 900 feet. 010 is 1,000 feet, and 100 is 10,000 feet. What you do is you add 2 zeros at the end of what you see here in order to get the height of that sky cover. Here are the abbreviations that you might see for the amount of the sky cover. If you see SKC or CLR, it means sky clear. There are no clouds whatsoever showing up in the sky. If you see the word few, it means few, and it means that there is more than 0 up to 2/8 coverage of the clouds. SCT stands for scattered and means that you have 3/8 to 4/8 coverage. BKN means broken, and you have 5/8 to 7/8 coverage of the cloud layer. OVC stands for overcast, and you have 8/8 or solid coverage of that sky condition. Now, if you see the abbreviation VV, VV stands for vertical visibility, and it means that you have an indefinite ceiling at that reporting point. Now, the difference between SKC and CLR for no clouds up there depends on how the observation was taken. A way to remember it is that CLR for clear means that no one was here. SKC means there was someone to see, because CLR, the abbreviation CLR, is used at automated stations when there is no layer at or below 12,000 feet AGL. SKC is used when there was a person there, so think of SKC as someone to see, there was a person there, whereas CLR is at automated stations. Now on the sky cover, one way to remember it is few means more than 0 to 2. Scattered is up through half, and broken is more than half, but not quite solid. When the sky condition is being determined, there is no provision for a thin or a transparent layer. All sky cover is considered to be opaque. There is no ceiling designator either in the METAR report. The ceiling is simply the first broken or overcast layer that is reported. For instance, if the first sky cover layer that was reported was BKN 009, that would be a broken layer and a ceiling at 900 feet AGL. Now, it is very nice to know about things like towering cumulus and cumulonimbus clouds. Those may be reported in the sky condition, and they are the only types of clouds that will be. TCU for towering cumulus, CB for cumulonimbus. If there is a human observer, that information that those clouds are present may be added in the sky condition information. So when you take a look at the METAR that we're working through, it would be coded right along with the sky condition, in this case OVC for overcast, meaning solid or 8/8 coverage, at 010 meaning 1,000 feet AGL, and CB the cumulonimbus. There was a human observer to add that information. May not always be there, but if there's a human observer, it might be. Now, other types of important clouds like altocumulus standing lenticular and cirrocumulus standing lenticular may be reported in the remarks.
I wonder what the code is for meteorologists standing in front of you. I don't know. Click, click. Here we go. Today's Sea Ice Edge, you can see that ice is expanding off the west coast even more there. No question about it, with a serious cold now in place across Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound. Remember, the blue shaded areas represent concentrations that are below about 70 to 80%. Above that, we're going to shade that in white here, so you can certainly see a greater concentration of ice pack. This doesn't necessarily reflect any change in the thickness of the ice, which is critical to our weather, of course, just as much as concentration is. And you can see how things are kind of filling in there across the Chukchi coast. And now, as we hear it from the ice desk at the Anchorage office, it surrounds Nunivak Island. So on the west coast, ice is certainly expanding, and still have a little bit of marginal ice there across parts of northern Cook Inlet as well. More anytime at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, and you can check out the thickness chart there. Here's a look at the marine forecast now for southeast. On the inside, wind speeds running around 20 knots or so with 4-foot seas from north to south. We have a north and northeasterly wind coming through, and a possibility of some freezing spray. Not as heavy as what we would see up north, but certainly the risk of freezing spray is something to pay attention to. Southerlies with higher gusts possible there. Steady winds at 30 knots with 11 to 12-foot seas in most areas. More of an offshore flow as we get into Thursday. Northerlies from the Lynn Canal southward into Stevens Passage, 30 to 40 knots there as the winds come up from the north. So do the seas, 6 to 8-foot seas expected there across the outer coast. 8 to 11-foot seas expected for your Thursday in southeast. For south central, northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound at 25 knots with a 4-foot sea, 7 to 8-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. Through the Cook Inlet, 20 to 30-knot winds from the north and the east, 8-foot seas west of the Barrens. Freezing sprays possible there, or potentially around, that's what I'm trying to say. Northerlies across Shelikof Strait, 25 knots with a 6-foot sea there on Wednesday. And for Thursday, 15 knots come up quickly to 30 knots as you head down Cook Inlet. Northeasterlies there, northerlies inside of Shelikof Strait, and we continue with that north and easterly flow wrapping around high pressure in the center of the Gulf. 25 to 30 northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound. 15 knots with a 3-foot sea on Thursday. For Wednesday in the Bristol Bay region, northerlies 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. North and westerlies cutting across from Cold Bay to Sandpoint and King Cove. Across the Pacific coast, 6 to 8 foot seas there, as high as 9 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast for Wednesday. Not a whole lot of change there for Thursday. Northeasterlies develop inside of Bristol Bay at 20 knots with a 9 foot sea, and northerlies down the Pacific coast 25 knots with a 6 to 7 foot sea on Thursday. For the Aleutians, remember I said there was going to be some wind out west, and there it is. Looks like anywhere from strong gales to maybe minimal storm force winds, southeasterlies at 50 knots, 26 foot seas across the west. As you get into the central and eastern chain, considerably lower wind speeds, 15 to 25 knots or so, with 5 to 9 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast and 5 to 8 foot seas across the Pacific coast, 15 to 30 there as that wave of weather works through. And once it does, the winds diminish in the west. You can see the winds kind of bending around low pressure as it swings through that trough. Northerlies into Unalaska and Dutch Harbor at 20 knots with an 8 foot sea, 7 to 11 foot seas for the Pacific coast, 6 foot seas north of Adak and Atka on that northwesterly wind at 20 knots for Thursday. For the west coast, easterlies coming off the YK Delta around St. Lawrence Island, 15 knots with a 4 foot sea, northeasterlies from St. Matthew to Nunivak Island, some of that over the ice. Northerlies outside the Kuskokwim Delta, 30 knots with a 6 foot sea, and northeasterlies around the Pribilofs on a 20 knot wind. That diminishes as we get into Thursday to 15 knots. East and northeasterlies north of Nunivak Island towards St. Lawrence Island, 20 knots with a 6 to 8 foot sea expected on Thursday. And for the north slope, southeasterlies over the ice around the coast, 10 to 20 knots. South and easterlies around Point Lay and Wainwright as well, 10 knots. And southerlies still working up through the open waters of the Chukchi, 15 knots with a 3 foot sea for Wednesday. For Thursday, winds remain fairly light, a south and southeasterly flow around the Beaufort Seacoast, southerlies around the Chukchi coast, and southeasterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound, 10 knots with a 2 foot sea there on Thursday. Let's recap the weather. All the action tonight as far as heavy snow goes is across northern and central parts of southeast, where winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories wrap all the way from Juneau to Hoonah, all the way up through Icy Cape, Cape Fairweather, and Yakutat. There's several inches of snow possible in that area, and around Juneau you could see as much as 10 to 15. A winter storm warning continues for you until 9 o'clock tomorrow. Winter weather advisories will expire around Yakutat around 9 o'clock tonight after about 6 to 9 inches of snow potentially in your region. Snow showers out around the Alaska Peninsula, otherwise just cold and clear for the interior with temperatures well below zero. Snow showers in some of the southern mountains. And that's about it. A quiet and cold day for Thursday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.